Hey everyone, Matt Rawle here, and welcome to Bending the Rules. Thanks for joining us here. I'm a pastor at Asbury United Methodist Church and author of Jesus Revealed and The Final Days, and a book about Grinch and Scrooge, and the forthcoming book called Faith Over Fear, Abraham's Imperfect Journey. All of these are from Abingdon Press. And today I'm joined by Dr. Ashely Boggan, scholar and secretary of the General Commission on Archives and History. And in this role, she ensures that the United Methodist Church understands its past in order to envision a more equitable future for all. She's the author of Nevertheless, American Methodist and Women's Rights Entangled, A History of American Methodism, Politics, and Sexuality, and her brand new book, Wesleyan, Vile-tality, Reclaiming the Heart of the Methodist Identity. Dr. Boggan, Ashely, thank you for joining me today on Bending the Rules.
It's great to be here.
And this is we are live. Like, this is not recorded, so like no pressure. And if you're joining us, you can ask questions. Post some questions in the comments, and they'll be forwarded to us. We'll check those out a little bit later in our time together. So, Ashely, being made vile. That's a really interesting mission statement. I've not seen that in a church yet, and maybe you have. Maybe in your travels, you've seen this. I've not gone into a church and says, I've seen things like hope and love and the mission to make Christians. I've not seen may you be more vile today. But was it 1739? Right, 1739 was a big year. In the Methodist movement. Wesley started field preaching. Charles Wesley penned Hark the Herald Angels Sing. And then there was this, are you willing to be made vile? Say something about how you understand, or maybe how Wesley understood this term about being more vile for the sake of the gospel.
Sure. So John Wesley gets called to Bristol, England, which is kind of a really dirty town. They didn't have a lot of the hygiene that we did today. It was an industrial.
You're making a lot of assumptions. You're making a lot of assumptions about the state of my home, but go ahead.
Yeah. But it was kind of the town that birthed the Industrial Revolution. And so, you can imagine without the modern day regulations that we have, that as industry is developing, it had a particular smell and a particular look to it. Yeah. Wesley gets called there by George Whitefield, who had been in Bristol already for a little bit, kind of preaching to increasing crowds. And he actually, one of my favorite facts about this is Whitefield asked 4 other people before he asked John to come to Bristol. So John was his 5th choice. And John,
what does that do to the morale to know that, like, you're not even getting the bronze medal? Like, how many people had to turn you down before you decided to ask this Anglican to like jump into? I didn't know that. That's fantastic.
Charles Wesley was the first person he asked.
What was Charles' problem? I mean, what was he writing too many songs?
It was too. Bristol kind of had a reputation about it, I think, and so did George Whitefield.
Sure.
So John gets asked to join George in Bristol, and he goes. And when he shows up, I think he's expecting George Whitefield to be preaching in preaching houses or sanctuaries, and he's not. He's preaching in the fields, like the dirtiest of all places, to coal miners, right? Who are arguably, right, like the ash covered faces of coal miners, right? So they appear dirty. And John Wesley was very much a neat freak.
Well, the physics, like he wrote a health book, right?
Yeah, he wrote a health book, and
he was like an Insta influencer on home remedies before it was a thing. That's good.
Yes, he definitely recommended different essential oils for different things.
Yes.
But he kept his own hair, and he kept it long, and he kept it very neat. And so he was very concerned about his appearance. And so here he is in this dirty town preaching outdoors to people whom are too physically dirty to let into a sanctuary. And so in this kind of doing this, he kind of goes through his own moral quandary. And it's like, do I do this? I don't know. I feel like I'm being called. I can see the effect that preaching is having on these persons, because these persons had never been in a sanctuary before. They'd never heard that they were worthy of God's love. And so all of that convinces John to submit to be more vile. So he submits and kind of surrenders himself to the will of God and goes out and does something vile that he considered morally reprehensible, that broke the standards of church, that broke the standards of state as to who was allowed to hear the message of God's love and where you could take that message, or the venue in which you could do preaching.
So for Wesley, I mean, vile, there was this association, I guess, initially, this association of dinginess, this idea of feeling dirty, somehow being very separate from the gospel work that he assumed the gospel work was supposed to be, right? It's kind of like when someone says, because I hug a lot, so my stole gets a lot of makeup on it. Yeah, I hug a lot,
Okay.
And folks say, but I rarely get the stole cleaned at the cleaner. But folks say, like, don't you want a clean stole? Like, well, if I'm super interested in a clean stole, I'm probably in the wrong line of work, right?
Yeah.
So there's this being made vile, but then it was kind of turned on its head, right? The vileness was then projected at, like, those with power, those who did not see the poor. So there was this transformation of feeling vile to recognizing that the vileness of which he was opposed, or should be opposed, had much more to do with those who had power and weren't sharing it, those who are oppressing the poor, maybe specifically in and around Bristol, but in other places. Say more about how this vileness, the transformation of that vileness.
Yeah. So when John kind of breaks his own standards of preaching and the rules of the church and the state, and goes out and preaches to coal miners, he's essentially saying that the coal miners gathered there in the field are equal to the parishioners at St. Paul's Cathedral in London.
That sounds dangerous.
Yeah. And for doing this, for preaching in the fields, for preaching without permission of the Bishop of Bristol, like, I mean, we could continue to list all of the things that were vile when Wesley does this. But he's upending the norms and is getting rid of kind of social hierarchies. And that is a thing that became kind of one of the markers of the movement of the people called Methodist.
Yeah, sure.
John Wesley critiques slavery at the height of the Atlantic slave trade, and Bristol was the port where persons were kidnapped from Africa and kind of brought through, like, the goods that came from the slave trade came into and out of Bristol. And so he's not only critiquing slavery, he eventually is letting women preach at a time when they had no legal identity outside of men, at a time when they had no kind of assumed business, quote unquote, right, being in public. And I mean, just on and on and on. So he's absolutely upending all of the norms of society. And to me, this book is subtitled "Reclaiming the Heart of Methodist Identity," and that's what I think Methodists are called to do in this world, is to upend norms in order to center the outcast, listen to the silenced, and just love everybody.
Yeah, well, but that love everyone is hard work, right? Like, it's not passive. It's not to each his own. It's not. So, for example, what are some of the ways, because you've outlined in Wesley's day this kind of list of vile attitudes and positions and postures? What are some of the things that you're seeing today, either churches that have lived into a vile-tality, or ways their churches should? So what is the correlation of the things that seem to be vile in Wesley's day versus what are some of the things that those markers that churches should be looking for today in terms of how to get their hands dirty for the sake of the kingdom of God? What are some of those things that you're seeing?
I think today, it's really about how are churches engaging in their local community in order to make a difference locally that might have either unknown or unforeseen greater impacts. So, how is a local church opening up their sanctuary? Maybe they have a gender neutral bathroom in their sanctuary and there's a nearby school that doesn't have space for a gender neutral bathroom. So how are churches showing up and supporting persons with either a trans or a non-binary gender identity? How are they supporting kids as they come out? How are they supporting and being a literal sanctuary for our immigrant brothers and sisters of Christ who are being taken from school, from streets, from work, from their homes? So I think in those ways, churches today are doing the work of vile-tality, right? They are trying to essentially protect and empower people who, especially within this administration, are being targeted in particular ways because of who and how God made them.
So we're talking about bending the rules today. So what happens when, because one of the things I love about United Methodism is that we bend the rules and then we kind of solidify them as rules, which then leads us into bending those rules further, right? What do you see? What kind of trajectory do you see for the church these days? You've talked about the work that churches are currently doing. What do you hope churches will be doing tomorrow? What is some of that work? Because you're talking about archives and history, but that work is to propel us forward in the context of who we were and who we are created to be, right? So it's not just all these things happened in the past, but that is the springboard through which we do our work. What are some things that you hope to see moving forward? In other words, when someone reads this book, and they're going to, because they're gonna log on to wherever fine books are sold, and like, oh my gosh, I read about this book, I heard about this book on this fantastic webinar, this live webinar. What do you hope they will do after reading the work that you've done and you've proposed?
I think one of the big things that this book tries to get across is that when the Methodist Episcopal Church began back in 1784, and we went from being a movement within an established church to being an institution on our own, that's really when we started making rules instead of bending the rules. And we made so many rules across almost 250 years, all in order to seek our own power and influence and money and prestige and membership and all of these things.
Preach.
So I hope that this book inspires people to put some movement back into our current institution. And I think one of the only ways you can get some movement is to break and bend some rules, and now that we've had a general conference where, thank God the restrictive and prohibitive language was removed, particularly against, LGBTQ plus persons. But that is something that has happened on paper, right? That's not something that people are necessarily living into. Not everybody is. And we can make the same statements about race and racism, right? Like the central jurisdiction was ended in 1968 and the last church left the central jurisdiction in 1973. That doesn't mean that we stopped being
we stopped being racists. Yeah.
So how do we go from being progressive or being inclusive or walking as Christ walked on paper to actually walking in the footsteps of Christ, right?
It sounds like, it's the difference between armada and speedboat, right? Because when we bend rules, but then we solidify them, which means we build very big ships that move very slowly through the channels. Maybe to streamline some of these things and really not lose. And I know, like, anytime you get a critical mass of people together, there has to be some kind of boundary and rules and SPR and finance teams and this kind of thing. But maybe let us not lose the movement of movement, right? So this idea of being on fire and saving souls and asking questions later, of bringing people into a place where they know that they are loved, and they are also then called to love others, and then figuring out the language that's supposed to surround that later. At least it seems like that seems to be a lot of the work that you've put together, is remembering the beauty of the Methodist movement and instilling that movement going forward.
And I actually love the metaphor you just gave of kind of the armada versus speedboat, because I do think that's one of the core things that we've also lost, and that's probably getting at some of the vileness that Wesley had. Is he was very responsive. Sometimes, he was anticipating need, and because he was kind of a one-person shop running this movement and very kind of egocentric about it, he had the liberty to be responsive.
Yeah.
And, as an institution that is international, we gather every 4 years. And so we are no longer responsive. Yes, council of bishops can put out statements. Yes, general agencies can create resources. Yes, pastors on Sunday can preach on current topics. And so there's some responsiveness, but as an institution, it's every 4 years that we maybe get to say something, if we all agree that we get to say that thing, and if it comes up on the agenda before 5 p.m. on adjournment day.
Right. Yes. And I mean, and gosh, our world is moving so quickly that 4 years is a big, oh my gosh, 4 years is a huge deal.
It's huge.
Just in terms of what the world, like ChatGPT didn't exist like 4 years ago.
Yeah.
My daughter was a freshman in high school, and now she's like looking at colleges and stuff, which kind of makes me want to throw up a little bit. Like 4 years is 4 years was longer than Jesus's ministry.
Yeah.
So let's put it into context, or earthly ministry, right? So maybe now I'm not asking, Ashely, I'm not asking for more general conferences. I'm not asking for more meetings, but like perhaps adopting a movement of the Spirit as opposed to the crafting of legislation.
Yes.
At least having that mindset. We need both. But going out into the field and singing "Hark the Herald Angels Sing," and being and promising or making the commitment to lean into places in which you have not leaned before for the sake of your neighbor, just might help us change the world. And I'm summarizing your book, but that seems to be the beauty of the work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That's awesome. That's so good.
Yeah. All right. Now, is it my turn?
It's your turn. Like, I wrote a book too. I mean, we could talk about your book all day.
All right.
And we would all be fine with that. Yeah.
Now it is my turn. And we've talked about Wesley and other Methodists who have at different times and in different ways done this submission to be more vile. But doing that takes courage. It takes faith, because if you're actually being vile, it's going to be scary. And so after all, most of us feel kind of societal pressure. I mean, I'm, I was raised in the South, so I was taught how to be a quote unquote proper lady, and I break that all the time. But we've been taught and kind of ingrained to act acceptably. And we are in so many ways conditioned to maintain the status quo, to follow rules. But in your book about Abraham, you have a lot to say about how courage and faith kind of help us in these moments. So tell us, how does Abraham's story inform courageous action in the face of social and societal expectations?
Yeah, gosh, it's a big question. Well, first I would say, I think the secret to leading well is learning how to disappoint people at a pace they can stomach. That seems to be like the secret in the sauce is disappointing people at a pace that they'll accept. So I think the first part of the Abraham story, I think addresses our paralysis, because we, generally speaking, and I hate using the royal we, often specifics are needed before we move, or certainly with me, right? I do not walk into this office not knowing what the schedule is for the day. And when there's a story of God saying, Abraham, go. I'm like, are you kidding? Like, how terrifying is that? Like, I need to know what's happening before lunch, not even like going to a place where I will show you. So there's this initial one foot in front of the other. There's this initial trust of God, and not having everything figured out in order to move. It's Wesley didn't know how field preaching was going to work out, but you start doing it anyway, this kind of thing. But how quickly, and this is what I find fascinating about this Abraham story, is that a perfect faith is not the prerequisite, because Abraham's story gets very problematic very early. And there's this tension between God's promise, Abraham's expectation, and then God's abundant grace to keep working with Abraham. So right at the very beginning, God says, go, leave everything behind. But then Abraham brings Lot with him. And Abraham doesn't bring Lot with him as a courtesy to Lot. He's not being friendly and give. No, Lot is collateral. Lot is, in case this doesn't work out, I know I'll have an heir. Right? So from the very beginning, written into the story, there's this tension. I mean, Abraham moves anyway, but Abraham kind of moves with the little something in his pocket just in case, kind of a thing. And then, because immediately after that, it says that so he goes to the land and he sets up shop, and there's this movement. God, I believe, part of the story is kind of, we're talking about the capturing of movement instead of institution or empire, or however you want to define that, right? God wants us to be on the move with God. God is alive and God is dynamic and God is on the move. And I liken it to, and here's the youth group lesson, right? Sin is an archer's term, and you missing the mark, you shoot the arrow and you miss the mark. And the problem is not the problem. The gift is the target is affixed to God, and God is on the move. So if I was aiming this way yesterday, today I need to aim over here, which is why daily we seek God's guidance. We seek the role of the Holy Spirit in our life, because God is on the move, and we have to reassess and readdress that primordial history. Movement from the garden, I don't think, was the punishment that many say that it was. There's this movement to join with God on the move. And we have a story of Noah and the ark, which is now on the move on the water, right? That's not nailed down. Cain wants to establish a city, and God says, no, let's not do that. The Tower of Babel, we want to build this thing to the heavens and set foot, and God says, no. And God blesses them with diversity and spreads them out to every corner of the nation. And then we have the story of Abraham, and it begins with move. Let us not forget that we are to be on the move, not in a reckless, anxiety-driven way, but a way that trusts in the direction that God is calling us, right? God wants to bring Abraham to a place, but then there is a famine in that place. And, but Pastor, you just said moving is a good thing. Abraham moves from the land and goes and seeks shelter in Egypt, but that's not what God asked him to do. We are to move with God, not just aimlessly wandering, nor setting up shop to ignore what God is calling us to do. God says, here's the land, and it got tough. So Abraham says, you know what? I'm out. I'm going to go seek help in Egypt. And it works out poorly, namely for Sarah. It works out poorly for Sarah, right? Abraham's story can be, you talk about vile, but it's vile in a different way. In a lot of cases in this story. And I think there needs to be a little more honesty and disclosure about the tension in this story. Abraham, and I'm just going to I'm a preacher, so I'm just going to keep going. So if there,
what are some of the vile things that Abraham did?
Yeah, this is so, and I'm thankful that in studying this book, I kind of opened up some of these things and said, oh, that's not what they teach in Vacation Bible School about Father Abraham and his faith. So he goes into Egypt.
Father Abraham's going to go through my head.
Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. So he goes into Egypt, and he goes, hey, babe, you're really beautiful. And I know when we get there, they're going to want to kill me. If I say that you're my wife, they're going to kill me and take you. So do me a solid and say that you're my sister. So there's some trafficking going on in Egypt here, which is something that is not preached from the pulpit. It's maybe in Bible study we'll talk about it, but Abraham benefits from this exchange of Sarah with Pharaoh, and one of the interesting things about this story is that it is Pharaoh who says, Abraham, what have you done? This Gentile, this outsider, foreigner of another nation is getting the vibes from God saying, what are you doing, Abraham? Like, you lied. Like, I'll give you some stuff, but like, get out, and he goes back. And this tension, because there's this constant tension of the promise going unfulfilled. And the lesson, I mean, there's a lot to unpack in terms of Abraham and Sarah, but the lengths to which God will go to get our attention, right? Go to the land that I'm showing you. He goes into Egypt. God starts speaking through Pharaoh, like foreshadowing for the next book of the Bible, right? It's coming up later, but spoilers. But then they go back to the land, and Abraham actually doesn't trust that this is going to happen, that there's going to be progeny, that there's going to be children. So Sarah says, all right, I have an idea. Like, why don't we bring Hagar into the story, right? And Abraham, obedient Abraham, said, sure, whatever you want, babe, whatever you want. And they have Ishmael. But again, Abraham treats Ishmael as collateral in just the same way that Abraham treated Lot as collateral, right? I mean, Abraham even says, like, can Ishmael not be the promise? Like, can we not do this? And God says, no, you're going to have a child. And I think one of the most, and like the stakes keep getting higher as this story continues, right? So there's Ishmael, and then by the oaks of Mamre, they're sitting there, and these angels, these visitors, these people come, and they announce that you will have a child, right? And then Sarah laughs, and there's this really interesting exchange where the three men said, like, Sarah, why are you laughing? And Sarah said, oh, I didn't laugh. And they're like, no, you did laugh. And this is them not, I'm convinced, and I'm not the sole proprietor of interpretation. So, but it sounds like, because I trying to make sense of this. I like flipped back in the story. They're not chastising Sarah, because Abraham laughed too. Like, let's not forget that. They're not chastising Sarah for her laughter. What I think they're calling out is that, oh my gosh, Abraham didn't tell her. At no point in the story yet has Abraham told Sarah that, look, I've been talking to God, and God says we're going to have children, and we're going to be the parents of the multitudes, and everyone's going to be blessed. There's no interaction as far as I think in the story. Abraham doesn't. So when Sarah laughs at this announcement, they're kind of looking at Abraham. Wait, why is she laughing?
You didn't tell her that she's good.
You did? Yeah, hold on. Let's back up. Let's back up, son. Like, you didn't tell your mama that you went out last Friday? Like, there's just this moment. There's this moment where they're like, Sarah, did you not know? Why, Abraham, why does she not know? And now the story's starting to make sense. Like, oh, can the promise not be through Lot? Oh, can the promise not be through Eleazar, who's a servant in my household? Oh, can this promise not be through Ishmael? Because there's something in Abraham where he does not want to share this with Sarah. For whatever reason. There's no context. There's no motivation given. But interestingly, it seems as if Abraham has not told Sarah about this, and she's laughing. And there's this moment which reminds us that when God has placed a calling on our heart, we are not to be immediately siloed in that calling, right? John didn't say, I don't need anyone else's help. This is all me. I'm going to be the only circuit rider, right? I want total control. Didn't happen that way. And in fact, and look, I mean, John Wesley got his feelings hurt a couple of times when Whitefield drew a bigger crowd, right? There's some things there's some things to learn about that. So I think there's this really interesting story where Sarah's laughter reminds us, like, oh my gosh, I don't think Abraham's told her. And what does that mean, right? And then there is this final, oh my gosh, this final chapter of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, right? So this whole time, Abraham has been testing and tempting this promise of God with his own collateral, with Lot, with Eleazar, with Ishmael. And now he has Isaac, and he's like, I am done. It's kind of like when you plant a church and you're now chartered and you're like, great, now, and we're going to hire a custodial staff. We don't have to set out our own chairs anymore. Like, we have made it. Like, we can now we can show up on Sunday morning and worship and then have a sanctuary that's closed 6.5 days of the rest of the week, right? So Abraham thinks he's done. He's done. And God says, hey, one last thing. I need you to take your son. And the language is so super interesting. I need you to take your son, your beloved son, Isaac. And that threefold thing, it's almost as if God, Abraham is like interrupting him. Hey, I need you to take your son. He's like, which one? The one that you love. Which one? Isaac. Oh, okay. And take him to a place that I will show you, right? And there's this beautiful ambiguity to the story that he's going up the mountain and there's two servants there. He goes, hey, we're going to go worship and we will be back. But that doesn't happen. Is Abraham falsifying things? Does Abraham trust that he and Isaac are going to come back? Yeah. Like, there's this beautiful ambiguity of the story and I think it's testament to faith over fear, is that there continues to be ambiguity. Even Abraham in this final chapter is, we're going to go up the mountain, we're going to worship, and we're going to be back. Like, really, Abraham? That's not what God said. Yeah. Are you trusting that God is going to intervene? Or do you know that you can't go through with it? Like, what's happening? Yeah. And I think we become so paralyzed in our own faith when fear is a part of the equation, that we have to have everything figured out before moving. And especially today, right? Especially today, in today's world, regardless of where you are on the spectrum of politics and all things, uncertainty is the word of the day.
I've heard it described as pre-traumatic stress.
Oh, that's so good. I had not heard that. I'm going to write that down. And that's going to be a sermon series in September. I feel it.
The fear overtakes everything, even your faith. Yeah.
Yes, and I do think, and I don't want to make light of. It's so cliche and easy, especially, and I'll just say this out loud as a white guy from the South. Don't be afraid. Like, the Bible says 365 times, do not be afraid. Like, that's easy for me to say because they're not coming for me yet. So I think some folks have a great reason to be afraid and to be full of. So what do we then do with that, right? Is we are to move. Do not be paralyzed. Throughout this story, there is ambiguity, and yet there's great movement all the time. There's movement. Though that movement has to be directed toward the kingdom, right? Not to move for the sake of moving, as we learned from the Egypt episode. Like, God didn't tell you to move to Egypt, right? Yeah. Movement toward the heart of God, and we see this kind of at the climax and the end of the story. Abraham goes up the mountain, and there's this fantastic conversation. It's the only conversation between Abraham and Isaac recorded in the history of everything. And you're a historian, you can go look this up later. But hey, Dad, I see the knife and I see the wood. Where's the lamb? Ooh. And there's this beautiful, oh my gosh.
That's a hard question.
That's a hard question. What a great question, Isaac. And Abraham says, the Lord will provide the lamb, my son. Now, that can be a word of comfort. The Lord will provide the lamb, comma, my son. Don't worry. Don't be afraid. Or if you put a dash there instead of a comma, and I know neither exists in Hebrew, but if you put a dash there, the Lord will provide the lamb, my son. Imagining that that's when Abraham grabs maybe Isaac's wrists, or some, the Lord will provide the lamb, and it's my son. Oh. I think the lesson at the very end, because the sacrifice is happening and the knife is coming down and an angel swoops in. Abraham, what are you doing? Wake up. I know I said to be more vile, but this is ridiculous. Stop what you're doing. Stop. And it says, at that point, Abraham looks up and sees the ram in the thicket. I am convinced that the ram was there the whole time. It's not that the ram suddenly appeared and got caught. And I think the lesson, and maybe the lesson, if we were to combine our two works, Ashely, in terms of Abraham's imperfect journey and being made more vile, is to lift up our eyes and to see that, and to ensure that our own religiosity doesn't cause us to be blind to the way in which God is providing. I'm convinced the ram was there the whole time, right? It's just that Abraham finally looked up and saw it. Yeah. When Abraham said, the Lord will provide the lamb, my son, he was telling the truth, and it was there. The ram was there to be had, but he was so blinded with obedience to what he thought he was supposed to do that he could not see the way in which God was already providing for this moment. So it's not kind of to sum up, I guess, it's not to be more vile for the sake of being more vile. It's to place yourself in a position to do the good work that God is calling you to do. And that will bring you into places where your hands are going to get dirty and you're going to be scared and even voyeuristic in the beginning of in a new context, in a new place. Be vile because God is calling you to the hurting places of the world, right? To climb the mountain and trust that the lamb is going to be there when you get there. So, yeah. And I think, because originally, and I'll just open this closet a bit, when Abingdon said hey, we'd love for you two to talk about your books. I'm like, a book about John Wesley and vitality and Abraham? Wow, what's the,
connection there?
What's the connection here? Right.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who had that kind of
okay. Well, yeah, I trust you. We'll do, and I think, and this is kind of in real time, I think putting ourselves in position for the movement to move again, I think is at the heart of both of these things. So maybe it's time for questions from the crowd. If anyone who's watching in this very live webinar, if you have questions, shoot them in the comments and put them there, and we'll take a look at it. Here's one. Okay, so Sherilyn Crawford, United Methodist Church 60 miles south of me has been fined by the city for having a porta potty in their parking lot for the unhoused to use. Ooh. They've offered tenants in their courtyard for overnight sleeping spaces and a warming center in the evening once a week. They're facing steep fines and repeated court dates. Oh dear. How vile. She goes, how vile. And our pastor is being personally fined as the representative of your church. Ashely, would this fit into your view of being made vile for the kingdom of God?
Yes. And I think this also speaks to kind of what early Methodists were known for. So you mentioned at the beginning, right, that 1739 is a big year, and it is. So within 6 weeks of preaching in the fields in Bristol, John begins construction on the first Methodist building in the world called the New Room. Yeah. And it was supposed to be like a preaching house, but John quickly realized the myriad needs of people in Bristol. So it wasn't a preaching house that had it didn't look like churches today where, you have like pews screwed to the floor. It had benches that could be pushed to the walls, and it could be then a medical dispensary or a library or a place for community gathering or community bartering and trade. And upstairs, it had apartments for either circuit riders, preachers, or people in need. And I think, right, that one of the things, speaking about movement, right, and kind of letting our own expectations get in the way of the movement of God, I think we've gotten so used to church being a thing that happens on Sunday morning, and that's the only time the church doors are open, because heaven forbid someone just wander in. Right? Like, and so I think when we begin to embrace the malleability of our physical spaces and open them up to meet needs of the community in whatever ways those needs are, even if they break the rules that your county or your city or even municipality is set up, and even if you're fined, keep doing it. Keep doing it. And my advice would be, get the local paper or get a state paper to come and say, here's what our church is doing. Here is how we are being treated by just simply caring for those who need access to a restroom and a safe, warm place to sleep. We're being fined this much. And I bet you could get like, a GoFundMe thing set up for the pastor in the church to help support that.
And that goes with another question that came in is in your context and in the way that you've been working with churches and speaking with annual conferences and going across the country, what are some ways that people can lean into, like, working with their municipality? What are some ways that they can chip away against injustice? And I don't know if you have an example of a church that's doing it, or what would you recommend for churches that want to lean into becoming vile?
I do think that there are places and spaces where you don't always have to work against the system.
Oh, say that.
And unless, so, right, not all government is bad. Not all regulations are bad. Sure. I fully believe that at the heart of government is support and empowerment and rights. I think
we the people, in order to form a more perfect union. Yeah.
But so, if you are living in a place where, like your school board is doing work that, okay, here we go. For example,
yeah.
I know it takes a second sometimes. So, in certain states, right, like Black history is being removed from public school classrooms. And so how do your churches work directly with the school board, or kind of form their own school board if you need to, in order to complete the curriculum so that curriculum is no longer censured, so that everyone's stories are told and we don't run around with this myth that America is some great, wonderful place that's never hurt anybody, that's never done anything wrong.
Yeah.
So I think, how do we work within the system in order to fix the system is also just as important as bending the rules.
For sure. I mean, and which rules to bend, right? If you bend all of them, you're going to bite off more than you can chew, to steal a cliche. I mean, if our faith is to be trusted, I say our faith, if the message that we hear, there's nothing that humanity hasn't screwed up, including our own government. And it is okay to say, like, hey, we got some stuff to work on. That is okay. That doesn't, let us be honest about our history so that we can move forward, right? If we are blind to it or deaf to it, we can run into some serious problems. There's another question here about Isaac. I love this question. It says, I've always wondered, did Abraham fail the test?
That's a good one.
Was God? Yeah. And I think, and the question goes on to say, was God hoping Abraham would fight back?
Yeah.
I think so, because earlier, and I think this is why this is included in the story, there is this bargaining and bartering over the souls in Gomorrah. in Sodom, where God says, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And immediately Abraham's like, wait a minute, far be it from you, a just God. What if there are 50 righteous people in there? What if there are 40? And like they keep going down, like they're on the lot, arguing over a Subaru, right? They're just like, what about 30? What about 20? And they're doing this. And then when Abraham gets to 10, God moves. And I wonder if the test is, okay, Abraham, you fought for the souls of Sodom and Gomorrah. What about the soul of the one? What about the soul of the one? Because they never get to 1. They stop at 10, right? So there's this bargaining from Abraham over those souls. So when God says, take your son, I do think there's an element of God not hoping. It's so interesting. Like, does God hope? Like, that's a whole nother theological question in terms of does the divine hope? Because then if the divine hopes, then is there something missing within the divine, the vulnerability of hope? We don't have time to get into that. It's a really super theological question. So does God hope? I don't know if I would say that God hoped for a particular outcome, but I do think that there's a moment where, because we have to get into a lot of questions of why did God put a test in front of Abraham to begin with? That's a whole nother podcast. It's a whole nother webinar to talk about. Is it process theology? Is it open theology? How much does God know? That's whole. But I think the point is, my Abraham didn't fight back for Isaac. He fought back for Sodom and Gomorrah. And when God says, take your son, he starts moving. Again, to me, it feels like a movement into Egypt earlier in the story. Like there is a great chiasm in the story where the movement to Moriah mimics the movement into Egypt, where he's blind to what God is really asking him to do. So yeah, I think there is an element of, did Abraham fail the test? I don't know if the language works out exactly that way to say that he failed the test, but I find it very curious that Abraham doesn't immediately fight back and defend Isaac. And I think it's much in the same way of him going into Egypt and not trusting that the famine would be done. Another question. Let's see.
Yeah. Speaking of movement, like how do you breathe breath into dry bones? I'm assuming that is how do you get something that is so unwilling to move, right? How do you breathe life into maybe this?
Yeah. And I think, well, my first answer, and after, again, this is very live. My first answer is, why do we assume that it is us who is breathing into the bones, right? I think it is our job to create an environment in which God's breath may move unhindered, right? And I don't know if that's exactly what the question is asking. Robert is asking, because I do think sometimes we think, and let me talk as a clergy person, as an elder, I do think I make the great misstep in thinking that it's me who is breathing life into the congregation, right? Especially it's Holy Week next week. Like, oh my gosh, there's like 1,000 things to do. And we had a staff meeting yesterday, and my staff kind of said, hey, and I love this about my staff. They said, hey, you're really grumpy. Like, you are not in a good mood. And they know, because we've done like Enneagram work and this kind of thing. And I'm a 7, if that hasn't been obvious from the great hand gestures that I've been doing for this entire 30 minutes. When I'm in a bad place, I disintegrate into a 1, which means like, yes, sir, no, sir. We have to get this stuff done. We have to, and kind of what they were saying to me is, stop assuming that you're the one who's going to raise Jesus. Yeah. Right. Our job is to proclaim what God is doing, to create an environment in which bones can move, right? Give the bones space, right? Don't bury them, I guess is what I would say. Don't bury the bones. Give them space and trust that it is God's breath that is moving into these places. And Robert, I don't know if that answers your question or Dr. Boggan, Ashely, if you have something to add in terms of.
I mean, I think I would, that kind of plays on the way that when you read John Wesley's journal and the correspondence surrounding his first time field preaching, he's there for like 3 days before he actually does it, because he's trying to I think he's trying to struggle with God. Like, I see this is working.
He goes ahead. We say that again. What does he do?
He
goes ahead. Like, did you say he moved like 3 days ahead of time before he started?
He was in Bristol for 3 days before Heathfield. It's not like he arrived in and then just went,
yeah.
Right? But he sees George Whitefield do this, and then he like sits with it and wrestles with it, and finally submits. Right. So
I love
that is, I guess, like letting God breathe breath into the dry bones by submitting, by kind of, and it's, I'm very kind of millennial feminist type, and so I've always been suspicious of the word submit.
Oh, sure.
There's like an empowering of submitting to God and letting God work beyond you.
Almost. I love that. Yeah. I love that. Well, we could talk all day, and I would love to talk all day, but I don't want to keep the webinar going on all day. That's going to use up way too much energy and battery power, or at least on my laptop. I don't know how you're connected. But to everyone who is here, we'd love for you to check out both of these works, and you can find them wherever fine books are sold. Check out amplifymedia.com/bend the rules for more information. Cokesbury.com, abingdonpress.com, all of these places. And I'm sure you can find Dr. Boggan and I on the socials and get connected with us if you have any questions. Ashely, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And absolutely. And to everyone who's watching, I love you. God loves you, and hope you have an amazing day.
Bye, y'all.